Shatuni, Shatuni, Shatuni. The book that's hard to get. Oh, Shatuni, Shatuni, Shatuni. But you can read it yet. Come on, guys. It's a call and response video. What are we even doing here? Hello. My name is Nate Rankin. Welcome to Books You Haven't Read. I read Shatuni. I read it on an ebook. I was about to hold up my e-reader. I read The Sublimes by Yuri Mamleyev. I can't remember exactly who. I want to say it was someone like Timothy Snyder or like Masha Gessen or Julia Yaffe or, one of those Anglophone Russia knowers that recommended this novel. And it was something very grand and overarching, whether it was like, the novel of the soul of Soviet Russia or the novel that explains like the current, Russian soul or whatever. It was something impressionable, but obviously not so impressionable that I can articulate it. Yuri Mamleyev is known as the creator or founder of metaphysical realism, which is, I believe, I know Viktor Pelevin is associated with that. I think maybe Vladimir Sorokin is as well. Not sure. Don't fact check me. But those two guys were kind of part of the literary salon circle, or one of the iterations that Mamleyev himself started. It's very obvious, like the influence that Mamleyev had on Pelevin, just within the limited amount of each that I've read. I had a hard time finding this book. I think I was not allowed to buy it because of American sanctions on Russia. I was trying to buy it, legally, like a good boy, on a Russian website. And I was, buying it because I couldn't find a pirated copy. And I am a 90s baby, right? Okay, so my primary understanding of the internet is that it is for piracy. The internet is for the unofficial stuff. It's a place to do crimes, but like petty, fun crimes that inspire you to make and share art in the world. So actually, I'm a good boy, and you can't rat me out. The internet is a lot like the underground, and we're back. The underground is a very big theme in this book, and I guess in Mamleyev's work generally, in the full sort of Dostoevskian sense, Notes from the Underground. The underground as this like counterforce of public life in public narratives in publicly acceptable speech. This book was published in Samizdat, so wasn't published by all the literary houses were like state censored and everything, so it was just independently made and sort of passed around, and it reads like a book that would have been written in really small installments. It's 5 to 10 pages, I feel like, a chapter, and so you can really feel like that kind of constraint of the form. Anyway, eventually I found a copy of this book on Discord from a helpful librarian, let's say, on Discord. So friend me on Discord if you just want to I'm not gonna have like hard to find books necessarily, but we don't have to. We can just trade military secrets. It's fine, or we can talk about books. Friend me on Discord. We'll talk about books. The title has been, I've seen it variously translated as like the Ramblers or Cranks. And my understanding is that this word in Russia is used for bears that are unable to hibernate or like kind of wake up from hibernation or something and end up roaming around in like a half delirious, half awake stupor. I don't quite know why they call them the Sublimes, because I like that word better than the Metaphysicals, which is what the group is actually called in the novel. But I don't think they ever use the word Sublimes. I don't know. It's not that important. And you can think of this novel as, somewhat projecting a negative image of the society, showing the dark underbelly, the seedier side. This came out in 1966, which would have meant it was, being composed in the period of liberalization of Khrushchev, kind of post-Stalin. And you just think about the historical situation. You had kind of in the generation prior, you had Stalin and his concentration of power, Stalinist purges, the Nazi invasion of Russia, Russia nearly getting beaten in World War II and then roaring all the way back and ending up being the victors. the Iron Curtain, the nuclear age, Stalin's final years of paranoid terror, the gulags, and like the gulags were like overfull. So one of the big, things that Khrushchev did was he let a bunch of people out. And so a whole bunch of people that had been kind of sold out by their family members and friends, all of a sudden were right back in, everyone was kind of right back into it with each other immediately, both the people that sold them out and the people that had been sold out. So it was a lot. And it was all really fast, and it was enough to make you feel like a drunk little sleepy bear rambling around in the goddamn wilderness. There was this, fully constructed totalitarian state around you, but perhaps the self, no longer felt so constructed. So a whole new culture was needed to respond to that problem, and there was a whole counter society being created in terms of psychology and cultural memory. And if this book is any indication, that society was full of turmoil and a kind of dazed violence whose reasoning can't quite be formulated. Our protagonist is a man named Fyodor Sonov. I think Sonov means sleepy or something. I'm not quite sure. But he truly is a bear of a man, as Ben Shapiro might say. He's our little rambler. He's our little crank. He is actually literally a very big man. And when he gets off the train in the first scene, the world around him is described as kind of blurry and unreal and almost like shades of things. And he is, on a search for a higher reality. It's something that he can't quite articulate, but it's something that he feels very strongly. How does he want to, reach this higher reality? Well, through serial murder, of course. Literally, like he's kind of described as this almost managed brutality when he gets back to his family, that he's kind of always been this little fucked up kid or whatever that's been murdering people. And like he tells this story, the whole first scene, spoiler alert, he like kills a guy and then he tells the corpse kind of his life story, telling the corpse telling us. And at one point in that story, he talks about being a lifeguard and how he would swim out to people and either, let them drown or just miss them. Oh no. And anyway, he would take part in their murder that way. And that was a way for him to kind of sublimate this urge. But now the urge is roaring in full bloom. That's kind of a mixed metaphor. The plot of this book, such as it has a plot, is look at all these weird freaks. Because after this murder in the opening pages, where we get this monologue to the corpse, we follow Sonov back to, through the underground, back to the nest, which is the house, his kind of family house, there's two families that share it. His family shares it with another. And, we're thrust right into the grotesquerie right away. I'll try and say this as nicely as possible, but there's like a couple that's part of his family that engages in this like very macabre ritual of assault, followed by impregnation, followed by something that is very much not an abortion, but might resemble one. But like, it's very explicit. It's very grotesque. Again, it's a very violent book. I think when Mamleyev he could never get this like published officially in Russia for the longest time, but he tried to take it to an American publishing house, and the Americans told him the world is not ready for this book. So, there's stuff like that. There's one of the insanely like memorable guys is this guy named Petya, and he is like, growing colonies of diseased skin and pustules on his skin. And he is, that is his food. He is eating himself. And he's like a lot of the characters in this book, like he's doing it, and he's either doing it for ideological reasons or he's backfilling kind of these insane ideological reasons as to why he's doing it. His reasoning is that, to accept something from the world, even if it's just food or subsistence, was equal for him to a religious or rather existential suicide. And there is Sonov kind of falls in with this group. They call them the metaphysicals. And the metaphysicals are this kind of, bohemian underground bunch of like kids or psycho slackers. And again, they're all like coming up with their wacky fucking philosophical ideologies. The chief of which is called the religion of I. I don't know why they didn't call it ideology. Sitting right there. Why? I mean, it's translation. You can just make it up. I should say, Marion Schwartz translated this. Sorry for not saying that earlier. But yeah, they have this. To describe the religion, it's tough. It's like. It's sort of this like profound solipsism, right? Where the highest form of spirituality is essentially falling in love with yourself, forms of self-love, but also recognizing that yourself is one and the same essence with everything, very bohemian kind of Hindu-style mythology at base. But it's also very jumbled together. It's very syncretic of an obviously Russian character. And this group of the metaphysicals is, I think, supposed to be kind of a stand-in, kind of a hyperbolization of the Yuzhinsky circle, which is something that Mamleyev started. And he started this as like kind of an artistic literary salon gathering of artists, intellectuals, thinkers, dedicated to non-political forms of dissidence, primarily through art. He described himself as neither a Westernizer nor like a nationalist view, but a secret third thing that was in opposition to the official Soviet regime. And he was primarily interested in like mysticism and esotericism. Later iterations of the Yuzhinsky circle included Vladimir Sorokin, Viktor Pelevin, and a guy named Alexander Dugin. He's kind of the chief like rightward shift of where this whole circle went. One of the comments that Mamleyev apparently made was, post-Stalin, there was an official intelligentsia Russia and a burgeoning underground. There's something very like highfalutin about the metaphysicals, but also very rough-hewn. Like it feels like the basic building blocks of something else are being assembled in the rudimentary and oppositional forms. They are this obviously kind of schlocky version of the Yuzhinsky circle. To me, there does seem to be something essentially reactionary in nature, both in real life and in what's fictionally depicted. And if for no other reason, like that makes sense, right? Because the stated state ideology is socialist, communist, leftist in form. So in real life, like forms of Nazism were sort of welcomed. Again, like they were into occultism, they were into esotericism. That helped them kind of onboard the Nazis, like the Alexander Dugin guy I mentioned earlier. And like, you understand that because you would assume there's going to be some rightward response in the dissidents. Same as you see like Islamist parties being the popular opposition to secular military dictatorships of the Middle East. Another, I think, interesting background of sort of Mamleyev's ideology is he wrote this book called Eternal Russia, and it's in like the late 90s or early 2000s. It was all post-Soviet, and it was in that kind of in-between where they're sort of researching for their national identity. And so his is like a 500-page philosophical treatise on like the soul and character of Russia and their destiny toward the rest of the world. And it does feel, I'm not saying it's only this, it does feel like it has the character of essentially nationalist or imperialist, that it provides a lot of justification for a lot of that stuff. And, I imagine that sort of thinking is quite favorable to those in Russian power today. So it's interesting to kind of see, this book is like the start of like a countercultural movement in Soviet Russia. And now it feels like guys like, Mamleyev and Dugin are kind of the intellectual backbone of a lot of like the authoritarian shit that Putin is doing today. And the last thing I'll say on their kind of religion of I is there's almost this like whiff of like Ayn Rand's like objectivism, that pursuing your own selfishness is a virtue. It has that character to it. So that's another thing I'll say about it. But that's because I think like It probably felt like the self was really getting crushed in the ideological tumults of the time, right? And part of the non-political life was the cultivation of the self. Indeed, the worship of the self, or maybe worship of that which is simply outside ideology or state ideology or official narratives. And I can understand, intimately the desire to want to make the self a non-political haven, especially at this moment in my life. So the plot, is kind of, look at all these freaks and their freaky philosophies, and they sit around talking about it, and then eventually the ideology and the conversation becomes combustible, and things happen, and you'll have to read the book. It's full of zany and kind of half-coherent philosophical discussions, and everybody is just kind of on their own fucked up shit. It's very grotesque, as I said, but underneath all that fucked upness is an earnestness to solve the impossible situation of living that you find yourself in. So yeah, I was very glad to read it, and I was very glad to be able to find a copy of it. Thank you for watching. Friend me on Discord, friend me on Goodreads, and just, hey, hit me up. We'll chat about books, whatever's on your mind. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and have a good day.